Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about some of the books, series, or authors that I would not have read if it wasn't for Booktube. Booktube is such a great place to get recommendations for new reads that my reading experience would be significantly worse off without it. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the first series I want to talk about, and that is The Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time is probably my all-time favorite fantasy series, and not only that, it has my favorite character of all time. The main character of Wheel of Time, Rand al'Thor, is probably my favorite character. I think the journey you go on with Rand from Eye of the World, Book 1, all the way to Memories of Light, Book 14, is unlike anything else I have read in any literature whatsoever. It is an incredible journey. Now, I'm sure there are some people screaming right now that the main character from the Realm of the Elderling series, Fitz, I think is his name, is a better journey, and I can't comment on that because I have yet to read that 16-book epic by Robin Hobb. So that is a series I plan on getting to at some point, and that is another one that I will have read because of Booktube at some point, but not there yet. So for the time being, Rand is my favorite all-time character. Now, this is a series that I would not have read if it wasn't for Booktube because, one, it is so long. There are 15 books in the series, and I think at the time, without Booktube pushing me forward and talking about how fantastic of a series this is, there's no way that I would have willingly picked up a series that was that long. Even after hearing so much positivity and praise about the series, it was a series I put off for quite a long time. It was something I was interested in, but man, just thinking about the effort I was going to have to put in to read it was something that kept me off. But if it was not for Booktube, I would not have read it, and I'm so glad I did. Like I said, probably my favorite fantasy series, probably my favorite character of all time, and none of that would have happened if it was not for Booktube. Also, one of my favorite books of all time, I think, what is it, Book 12, the first book that Sanderson took over after Robert Jordan's passing, The Gathering Storm, has one of my favorite moments in all of fiction, and is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. There's a moment in that book, like I just said, it's something I think about all the time, and to get that special experience because of Booktube is awesome. Next up is another series that I am not that far into yet. I'm actually only 3 books in, and will hopefully be starting book 4 sometime here soon, and that is The Wars of Light and Shadow by Janny Wurts. And really, Janny Wurts as an author in general, I'm in the middle of another one of her works right now, The Master of Whitestorm, and she is an author that I would not have experienced if it wasn't for Booktube. I saw a lot of praise for her, mostly about Wars of Light and Shadow and just how wonderful of a writer she is and all these things. I've seen some interviews with her, and just, she's a fascinating person who has experienced so much stuff and just has done so many things, one, to help her writing, and I think she is just kind of the person who has a sense of adventure as well. But she is not an overly popular author outside of Booktube, so I don't think I would have ever gone to like a Barnes & Noble or something, or even on Amazon, and gotten a recommendation from her of any of her books. And so if it was not for Booktube, I would have missed out on some amazing books. Those first 3 books of the Wars in Light and Shadow, that's where I'm at, are amazing. It is honestly the best writing I think I have ever experienced in my life. Her and Hemingway, when it comes to prose, like the actual written word, are probably my 2 favorite authors. Those are the 2 that come to mind more than anybody else. I'm sure there's somebody I'm forgetting. If I went through a list, I could think of some that are, should be up there with them. But Janny Wurts, she's on another plane. That's what I say. She has like transcended normal English and has gone to Janny Wurts land with her writing. It is absolutely fantastic. And it's not just her writing. Her storytelling and character growth, development, world building, all of that stuff is absolutely fantastic in the series as well. But once again, Booktube led me down to that path. Next up is a book that I would not have read, and that is Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. This is in no way a book I would have picked up on the shelf, read the description of, and decided to read it by myself. If I hadn't heard Mike from Mike's Book Reviews talk about how amazing of a book this was, there's no way I would have read it, because the basic premise of it is a coming-of-age story of somebody living, is it in Alabama? Or, yeah, I believe it's in like 50s, 60s Alabama. There's no way I would have read that description and been like, that is a book for me. One, I've never even been to Alabama. I'm not from the 60s, and coming to age wasn't something at the time I knew I liked. I trusted people on Booktube that I had similar taste in with books that I had read similar things to, and as they talk more and more about these coming-of-age tales, I realized maybe this would be something I would like. And Boy's Life, man, it hit the nail on the head. And like I said, it doesn't have a crazy cover. Actually, I didn't say that yet, but I think the cover I saw originally for this book is like a tricycle or a bicycle or something. There's no way that would have captured my eye in a bookstore or anything, but listening to people I trusted, their opinions on, and had similar reading taste led me to, I think this is, I know it's a top 15 book of all time. It's one of my very few 5-star reads. It might even be, I think it's like 12th. I'd have to double check exactly where my rankings are here. But this is another fantastic book. If you are somebody who likes oh, I can't remember the Stephen King, the movie name, but it's the one where the boys walk along train tracks and stuff. I think the novella that's based on is called The Body. I can't remember what the movie's called, but a similar vibe to that, but just that coming of age, growing up tale. This is a very special book. It made me cry, I think, 2 different times, just heart-wrenching. And as somebody who moved a lot in childhood, it hit me on another level. So if that's like an extra sprinkle in there for you as well, this is a book that might really resonate with you. Next up, we're going back to fantasy, and this is a trilogy of books called the Aurelian Cycle. Why I would have never read this without Booktube is, I think technically this is marketed as a YA fantasy book, and it's probably marketed more towards girls than it is to boys. Obviously, I read this when I was like 25 years old or something like that, so definitely the marketing, everything would have not have been for me or anything like that. This is the first book in particular, Fireborn, is one of my favorite books of all time. It is fantastic. The second book is a top 100 book, and the third book is like a top 40 book. So while I do think the first one is the best one, the other 2 are really good. You want to talk about some heart-wrenching emotional moments, especially in the last book. There's some really hard stuff. If you have read this series, which I'd be very surprised, this isn't like something that gets talked about a whole lot here on Booktube. It is a fantastic series. I forget exactly what kind of lore. Is it some kind of Russian lore? I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but it's following basically a ruling class is overthrown. The son of that ruling class ends up going through and becoming in a place of power in the new government. That is the basic premise of the story. And there's 2 main characters, a boy and a girl. And man, Annie and Lee are just... they are 2 fantastic characters. There's a little bit of romance in this story, and it's so well done. I'm not normally like the biggest romance guy, but it is just, this whole story is so well crafted. And like I said, this is a book that would have completely missed me from a marketing standpoint because I'm not the target demographic for this book whatsoever. I think it's actually pigeonholed. I think it is much more than a YA fantasy for girls. I think this is just a fantastic, while yes, a slightly younger leaning fantasy book, it doesn't have some of those more adult tropes, and it is following a younger cast of characters. I think this is absolutely something that pretty much anybody from any age can read. So I have to thank Booktube for even putting this on my radar, because without it, I would have never have read the Aurelian Cycle. Next up is The Never-Ending End of the World. And this is an interesting book because this isn't actually one that was recommended to me or anything like that. This is actually one, and this is the first book that somebody sent me when I started my Booktube channel. I don't actually accept books anymore, but when I was super early on doing videos here, I thought that was the thing I could do. And so when Campfire reached out to me and wanted to send me this book to do a review on it, I was all over it, and it ended up being a really good book. I really like this book. I push it anytime some like sci-fi stuff comes up. I talk about this book because I think, not that many people have read it. I think it's really good. But if it was not for Booktube, I would have never been sent this and probably would have never read it. So this is kind of one of the fun ones where it actually wasn't me watching Booktube. It was because I made a Booktube channel that I got this book and was able to read it. And I actually think I read it before it came out, so that was awesome. And once again, I do highly recommend you read this book. I don't get anything for you going and getting this, so don't think anything like that. But I just want to, send my praises of a really good sci-fi book that is done differently than a lot of dystopian sci-fis. Next up is The Captain, and probably indie fantasy in general. We could probably lump in a lot of like self-pub stuff here under The Captain. So The Captain is Will White's other series outside of Cradle. I think he has some other stuff too, but this is his newest series. I think he just had a new book. Yeah, a new book just came out called The Night, which I'll be reading here shortly. But this I definitely would not have read without Booktube because I probably would have never heard of Will White. I know he's a really big author when it comes to self-publishing, but that doesn't mean I would have ever heard of him. I don't think you find his books in like Barnes & Noble, and that's where I would have done most of my book shopping at the time. So I don't think I would have really got him recommended to me. And in general, I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about, self-published stuff. And I guess I just want to say that, this series and others, this is not the first self-pub series that I read, but without Booktube, I would have never have known about the scale and the scope of self-pub and indie fantasy. I mean, it is huge. There's so much good stuff out there, and without Booktube opening my eyes to it, I'm very much one of those people who had the idea of like a self-published book was just a book that was not good enough to get traditionally published, which at this point I know is so wrong because there's so much going on in the publishing industry that just could not be further from the truth at this point. There are some of the best stuff coming out right now. I know Ryan Cahill's series is some people's favorite fantasy series going on right now, and that's a self-published series. So I'm going to use The Captain and Will White as just an opportunity to say, because of Booktube, I have expanded my horizons and have read a lot of well, not a lot, but I have, become more open to self-published authors and writings. And, it has given me the ability to add even more to the TBR that is never going to stop growing. Next up is another huge fantasy series, and that is Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is a series that I would not have read because even though I hear how difficult it is on Booktube, there are so many good resources to learn about Malazan and get into it and see things after the fact that you read it. Same problem with Wheel of Time. If I had just saw this book, one, I don't know if I would have Gardens of the Moon, that cover that everybody sees with the tower. I don't think that would have really sparked my interest too much browsing through the book section, but also finding out that it was part of a super complex series, because I would have looked it up and realized, okay, so you have Ian Asimon's books as well as Erickson's, and there's like 28, 30 books or something. It would have just been too much. There's no way I would have even tried to have read any of it. And while I am only halfway through Memories of Ice currently, and it is an interesting experience to read, to say the least, it is not like anything else I have read. I do have to say, if it was not for Booktube, I would have never even have started. Next up is another author, but I'll use the book A Man Called Ove for this one. I would never have read this book. This falls into the category of, it's kind of just literary fiction, right? And that is not a genre of book I ever read beforehand. And I think it probably was Murphy Napier that I saw talk about this book, and I think she has a review where she like breaks down crying. And at the time I was like, wow, this must be something special to get somebody who reads a lot of books to, have that kind of reaction to it. I was like, I want to feel something like that when I read a book. And I am not ashamed to say I cried quite a few times in this book. It is one of my favorite books of all time. I think it's number 3. It's up there. It is such a special book. I know some people don't like it, which is crazy to me, but it is such a special book. It is awesome. And this is another one of those ones that Booktube got me out of my comfort zone. At the time, I was really just reading sci-fi and fantasy. And, this is a book that I would have just looked by and said, that's not for somebody like me. That's not my reading taste. And I could not have been more wrong, because it is, just such a fantastic story. And I am so thankful, because of Booktube, I read one of my favorite books of all time. And then the last book I want to mention is one of the weirdest books of all time. And that is, you're going to think this is a Harry Styles song, because it is, but that is In Watermelon Sugar. This is such a strange book. It's only like 100 pages, and I'm still not sure if I understand what goes on. It takes place in a place called Death, I think is what it's called, something like that. It's like a postmodern, post-apocalyptic book that is, maybe exploring the idea of like a new Eden. I don't know. It is a completely weird book, but I saw somebody, say that they found out that the Harry Styles song was named after this book, and then she read it, and so I was like, well, now I'm gonna read it, because that's such a weird thing that this random book that I've never heard of, that's super weird, is now the name of at the time, like the most popular song. I couldn't go anywhere without hearing that song just going on and on. And like I said, one of the weirdest books I've ever read. I don't think I can't say I had a good time with it. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it's weird. It's one of those ones that maybe I just wasn't, experienced enough to read a book like that at the time. But it's something else. If anybody else has read that one, that's the book I would be the most surprised on if anybody has read it, probably out of most of the books I've read. In Watermelon Sugar is one of the most bizarre, out there books that I've ever read. And somebody's probably going to drop in the comments like a paragraph long essay about what this book is about, which is another awesome thing about Booktube. But I would love to know some of the recommendations you have gotten from Booktube that have really hit with you, that were some of your new favorites or anything. And if you have any recommendations for me, I would love to hear those as well. But that's all for me. And as always, have a good one.